just completely opened my eyes to how accessible it is to actually start a business when you don't overthink it and you're just focused on validating something.
The water's fine, homie, jump into the deep end. Sow it, you will reap it. We talking how to start it, how to grow it, how to keep it. Take a deep breath. You are now rocking with Founder Secrets.
Daniel Dubois, welcome to Founder Secrets.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So Daniel's a mix of a founder of Key and a couple other companies he sold, and also an investor and just a peer exceptionaire. Is just an amazing person. Glad to have you on. It's a treat. And we're going to start off with a little icebreaker that will all three of us go around and do, which is what's been the biggest mistake you've made in your startup career? I guess it could be in life if you really want to go to the 1%, but I think generally it's business wise. And I'll start so you guys have a little time to think about. I think for me, it's attaching my sense of identity to the business. I think this happens to other founders too, but for me, I if the business is doing well, I'm personally like, I'm crushing. I'm a good, amazing person. I'm a smart genius. And then if the business is not doing well, I'm personally like a failure. And that just has the added effect of making the cycle worse. Because if the business is going down and I'm personally feeling like a failure, it seems to contaminate other people working with me. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy in that things only get worse and worse because I think they're going to get worse. Whereas if I could decouple those and still feel okay when business is doing bad and keep more of an even keel, it actually makes those highs and lows a little less extreme.
Yeah, 100%. I resonate with that. I think it's dangerous when we attach our identity to anything, when that identity can change and then we lose who we are. For me, when I think about the biggest mistake, everything's obvious in hindsight, right? Including success and failures. For my first company, ShareShed, I started so broad. I tried to be everything for everyone. And then as we started to progress, I got more and more focused. So in hindsight, I would absolutely have started with much more of a niche. I think a lot of people make the mistake of not thinking big enough. I've almost like swung too hard out of the gates. With Key, we had Credit Suisse and Wells Fargo as our lead investment banks. We're doing our first closing of $450 million on $2 billion of real estate that we were buying. And when COVID hit, that completely imploded. So in hindsight, it would have been so much better to have raised a few $1 million from some families, then maybe ramped up to $30 million, have a strong case study, cross the chasm to eventually get to the point that we can confirm Credit Suisse and Wells Fargo to lead a process. Because in hindsight, the GICs and the Norwegian sovereign wealth funds of the world don't invest billions of dollars into someone in their 20s as a first-time manager. So even if COVID didn't hit, I probably didn't see that deal getting done. But it was cool to walk into a room with top banks and some of the biggest funds in the world that would dive into our data room and look like they were taking it seriously. But I would take a far more lean startup approach in hindsight.
Good answer. So for me, I don't know if I made mistakes. I made tons of mistakes, but I don't necessarily regret them. But one of the things I think about is, what if I had moved to New York City earlier in my life? So I moved when I was 30 or 31, and I knew for a while that I wanted to move from Kentucky. And it made me a bitter person the last couple of years I was in Kentucky. And that wasn't good for me, but it also wasn't good for my last business. I was an unhappy person. I think in hindsight, I wish I'd done it sooner when I knew that I was ready.
Thanks. I didn't expect you to say we didn't make any mistakes. That's
well, I made a lot of mistakes.
So, all right, Daniel. So walk us through. In fact, why don't we go back a little bit, because you had a couple of companies beforehand that you just mentioned. You went too broad. And if anything, when I looked at them, it seemed very niche. So maybe walk us through your outdoorsy beginnings and the companies you founded.
Yeah, so I'm from Vancouver. It's a very outdoorsy market, right? Mountains and oceans. When I graduated high school, I went to Australia, where I backpacked for 6 months, and I couch surfed pretty much the entire time with my close childhood buddy. And we had the most amazing time as broke backpackers, where we had access to anything we could ever want, even though we didn't have anything, so we were going on bike trips with our neighbors, or, surfing with one of the dads who lived close to us, who sort of like took us under his wing. So trip of a lifetime, and came home my first semester in university, my entrepreneurship class. We watched a TED Talk called The Rise of Collaborative Consumption. So now it was rebranded to The Rise of the Sharing Economy, but it was before the sharing economy even had like a term. So this is 2010. I got goosebumps sitting in my class watching this TED Talk. Like, I got goosebumps now just thinking back to it. It talked about a small startup called Airbnb and Uber and Instacart, and just this world where there would be they're almost the gig economy, if you will, right? And a big part of this TED Talk, which at the time had like tens of thousands of views, now it has millions, but was around access over ownership. And they give this example of a drill where you don't actually need to own a drill to be able to have access to the utilization of a drill, right? It's like what you need is a hole in the wall. Very rarely, but yet more than half households across North America own a drill. And the utilization of a drill on average is under 15 minutes. And drill is just one example. You can go across, like, look at any outdoor gear, right? Like, how often are you using your tent, your ski gear, your kayak, whatever it might be. So anyways, I felt like I wanted to create a world that I experienced in Australia for not only other backpackers and people who are traveling, but here at home in our own backyard. At first, I was thinking that this would be the platform for sharing, for really like community building. It would be, you'd be able to connect with your neighbors. You'd be able to share items and skills. So if you want to learn a new language, it would be easy to do so. And you just actually build relationships with people close by. If you wanted access to any type of items that aren't used very often, you would have a catalog. Almost, there's a company called, I think, Neighborhood, something. It's almost like Facebook for your community where you live. As we got started, I realized that it was just so broad, and I started to go, okay, instead of like items, skills, and community, I'm going to focus on just items. And then I started to go, okay, out of all items, it's so broad. What actually is most underutilized, but something that people, when they want it more urgently. So eventually I landed on outdoor adventure gear. And in hindsight, if I was to start over again, I would have gone into just bicycles, or just, like kayaks, or something even more niche, and build up from there. My partner on the fund, now, I met him over a decade ago when he was building a company called Spin Lister, and they were Airbnb for bicycles at the time. Essentially, they sold to private equity. They sold two parts of the business separately, but one exit was 40 million. They had another strong exit. And that was that to me. When I met him, I was like, oh, that's cute. Like bicycles, like I'm bicycles, I'm kayaks, I'm like ski equipment. I'm so much bigger. So anyways, there's some lessons in there, and I can go for days.
Yeah, keep going.
Yeah. From there.
Well, first of all, is there a place to buy a drill? Or to rent a drill now? Like, I need a hole in the wall.
No. So here's like the biggest challenge with this business model is that stuff is just so cheap now. Like I saw this firsthand when I was building ShareShed. And by the way, we built a community of 10,000 people. So it was like the community that was valuable more so than the actual like revenue. You rented a tent for $40 and ShareShed makes $6, right? So there's part of me, I started to realize that this wasn't the next Airbnb compared to like the take rate that Airbnb receives. But yeah, what I also saw is just like, why would you rent a tent for $40 when you can pretty much buy a tent for $40? And then there's like tons of negative experiences where I'm like, I rent out some gear and it comes back a different sleeping bag than I rented out because like, someone's going to a music festival and they don't remember which one they rented. So there was countless experiences like that. So one day I was sitting in Hootsuite. Hootsuite is a Canadian unicorn. The founder was an early investor into ShareShed. And I had free office space there for our team. And I was seeing this trend of like, okay, we built a really strong community, but items are just like, I thought I painted a picture. This is actually an important lesson. People buy things for price, quality, and convenience. And then there's probably a layer of trust too, right? So I thought, okay, price. We're definitely cheaper than someone who has the overhead of a rental store and buying something. So we went on price. Quality. We can have like a try before you buy curated marketplace where we have higher quality than like, you know, a crappy rental store that has, you know, equipment that maybe is like out of date. Convenience, instead of having to go to a rental store, go buy something, then now you're going to have like nodes all around the area where you want to go. And trust, there's review system, whatnot. So I almost like lied to myself in a way, thinking that we won on all four of those. When in hindsight, you know, I can look at like price, you know, it's not worth it. The juice isn't worth the squeeze. Convenience, it's actually a massive hassle to coordinate pickup and drop off. Quality, I backpacked from Squamish to Whistler through the backcountry 4 days with my wife and some friends, like one of the most epic trips I've ever done. All stuff off of ShareShed. So like my backpack, my ice axe, my rope, my crampons. And my crampons started filling up with snow every step because they were just like old crampons that just, I don't know, not great. And, you know, I went down at one point. I pulled everyone else down in their ropes. And there was like probably a 50 foot gap crevasse that like would have been the end of me. So I have a photo looking back at that, and you can see like my bum slide of towards going into this gaping hole, and where I dragged everyone else down with me that, you know, dug in their ice axes. So that was actually the trip that I was like, okay, I don't think there's something here. I don't want to be responsible for someone's death. So anyways, I'm in Hootsuite one day shortly after that trip, and I'm just going like, we have a 10,000 person community. People love getting outdoors and connecting to people, but our like product market fit is community. It's not the fact that people are coming to our website for gear. So I went, what are the barriers holding people back from getting outdoors and getting after it? So the first one I mapped out was gear, but that's like how much of like, if you did a weighted, you know, sort of balanced scorecard, how much of gear is actually holding people back. Then you have community to go with. You have skills to get started. Even if like the three of us are friends and we want to backpack through want to go on some like crampon expedition, that, you know, community is not enough. You need like, you need skills to get started often. There's transportation. So a lot of that can be the barrier of actually like getting into the backcountry or whatever. And then just straight up inspiration of like wanting to do it. Like, I think a lot of us desire it, but we don't, like, there's not enough inspiration to make it happen. So I just, on this whiteboard, I mapped out those 5. I said, what would it look like to run an experiment this weekend? It's like three days from now, it was a Wednesday, and address all 5 of these. So I put out just to our mailing list, backcountry snowshoe trip, place called Joffrey Lakes, like gorgeous glacier lakes in our backyard here that I'm sure less than 1% of Vancouverites have ever seen. Like, it blew me away. My first time, I was like, how do I live in Vancouver? And I've never seen this before. So like, it's like, why do you live here? So anyways, we had 55 people sign up and pay. So it was a paid experience. I had to scramble. It was actually an EOer that owned a limousine company, and he had like a giant bus that I was able to rent. We went 55 people on this amazing trip. I then did a Facebook ad that was no one in our community were targeted. So it was just like a blind Facebook ad for a subsection of you know, a community that haven't heard of ShareShed before, didn't like our page, weren't on our email list. I put $30 behind it just to begin with. And we had 33 people sign up and pay. So that, like, you don't, as an investor, I don't see companies that have, you know, customer acquisition cost of under $1, right?
Yeah, that's amazing.
So from there, it's just every weekend, we did intro to ice climbing. We did sunset stand-up paddleboarding. We did a morning mountaintop yoga, all these curated experiences. And I just realized that this would be an amazing lifestyle business. You know, like, this is something that could scale around the world, but it wasn't something that I felt like was really going to be the next Airbnb. which is what I was passionate about. We're working on a big partnership with a company who came back to me and said, this makes more sense for you than it does for us. What if we just acquire you? I went to Roger Hardy, who's an EO and YPO member in Vancouver, one of my early investors who started Clearly Contacts, like really successful guy. And he said, one deal is no deal. See who else is interested. He's like, even if you're not looking to sell, build relationships so that they can buy you for more money in 1, 3, 5 years from now, but you have optionality. So like, what a great saying, right? One deal is no deal. So I went to the CEO of Mountain Equipment Co-op, which is the Canadian equivalent of REI. He was on my advisory board. Go to someone for advice, you get money. Go for someone for money, you get advice. Classic saying. We're having a beer together. And at the end of the conversation, he's like, wait a second, what about Mech acquiring you? Did the same thing with an executive at Airbnb who was also on my advisory board, going to him for advice. Hey, I got Mech. I got this other company now. What are your thoughts? At the end of the conversation, he's like, wait a second, what about Airbnb acquiring you? Would that excite you? Yeah, of course. And then I collected like 5 or 6 MOUs. I'll wrap it up here because this is like diving into.
Which MOU is like an offer to be acquired, or what's an MOU?
Yeah, an MOU, not non-binding, but like here's our offer. So ran a process just like how you'd run a process for fundraising as well, right? Where you just like nothing else matters. You're all into collecting as much paperwork as possible and then making a decision. I chose the deal with Mech. I'm trying to make sure I'm not saying anything confidential here. I chose the deal with Mountain Equipment Co-op. It was the best deal for our investors. It fell through the week that like we had CEO approval, we had their board approval, and then they had someone die on an experience on a cycling meetup, and their legal counsel were like, we can't touch acquiring. We had sharesheddingguides.com to put ourselves at risk for something like this to ever happen again. So like I was like had my signing pen ready to go in, like. I was fully due diligenced. I then went back to everyone else because I told them Mech was going to happen. Airbnb, or there was a company called Leavetown that just felt like 1 + 1 = 3. It was a great deal for our investors as well, where we owned like a large position in Leavetown that had really strong growth. I told Airbnb that I was going to go with Leavetown as my backup, as much as I said like Airbnb is my top choice, but I need to look after investors first and foremost. It's not about like what company I want to be at post acquisition. So they came back to me and they said, what if it's not about best deal for your investors, but what you're truly most passionate about? And they painted this amazing picture of like, I'm like in my mid 20s and that's report directly to the founders, unlimited travel budget, a ton of autonomy, one of the fastest growing companies of all time, owning a massive geo as a founder, essentially as like an entrepreneur.
Lifetime free Airbnbs.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I wish, right? And of course, I didn't end up reporting to the founders, and but yeah, I went back to Leavetown, and it was a really tough conversation to have of saying, "Hey, let's still do this deal. Like, I'm not gonna join Airbnb to kill this deal." But they were in similar spaces, and Airbnb gave me permission to stay on as an advisor to Leavetown. And that helped Leavetown a ton in hindsight. Like we got API access to Airbnb. I feel like they were growing a ton, but they didn't really know what industry they're in until I guess I learned through being at Airbnb, all the like conferences they needed to be at and whatnot. So yeah, long story short, I sold to Leavetown, joined Airbnb full time. And that was also Airbnb was experience of a lifetime, was there for a couple of years, stayed at over 100 Airbnbs. I looked over 300 flights in 2 years. I just lived on airplanes and it was just like pure hustle, which was a lot of fun.
If we wind back a bit, I'm curious, how did you get all these people as your advisory board? Like Airbnb, Leavetown, the co-ops, and like the richest. Is there like a small community of Canadian like billionaires and entrepreneurs where they all hang out together in like Hootsuite and Shopify? How did you get these people on your advisory board?
I was super fortunate to get into a program called The Next Big Thing. It's now called League of Innovators, which is almost like the Thiel Fellowship of Canada. So they picked 10 entrepreneurs under the age of 23. First month in that program, so I was in my last semester of college. I had four classes left. I ended up dropping them all. Never graduated. Even though it was like one semester left, I should have just finished. But it's just like everything that business school didn't give me. Of like our first month, we were told to read the Lean Startup. And I was spinning my tires trying to build ShareShed before joining this program. That's what got me into it. I had no idea what I was doing. I was pure hustle without any direction. So I read the Lean Startup, and it was just completely opened my eyes to how accessible it is to actually start a business when you don't overthink it and you're just focused on validating assumptions. It's like as simple as it sounds. So anyways, I went through that program. We had fireside chats with amazing people that they would bring in, and I would just always go to them and build a relationship, just like asking them questions. I had a professor at my college who said, do what you say you're going to do, and you're going to be in the top 10% of people by just following up and doing what you say you're going to do. So I'd often go to these entrepreneurs, and then I'd ask them for advice. They'd give me advice. I'd go out and I'd rather do it or not do it, but I'd go back to them and tell them why I listened or why I'm not listening. And just like, it works so well. First month of that program, I was the only person that was still in school in it. Everyone else fully dropped out. I kept one class actually. So there was the GSCA, the Global Student Entrepreneurship Awards. Obviously, we know each other from EO. So I went through that program. The judges of that event became my first investors. And it was actually EO who quite literally gave me my start alongside this program, the League of Innovators one. So it was Manny Pata, who is president of EO Vancouver, Praveen Varshney, who's a pillar of the ecosystem here in Vancouver, Ken Sim, who is an EO member, who's now mayor of Vancouver, Ron Hardy, who I mentioned, he sold Clearly Contacts for $450 million, then at 10x once afterwards when he took it public. Now he's running Kits. He's like Ryan Holmes, who started Hootsuite, just a bunch of EO YPO members. And then from there, that cap table, founder Saks Underwear, who's a EO member as well. I don't know if Saks is big in the US, but it's a pretty big deal here. No, it's not. Okay. But anyways, the seed investor in Uber, seed investor in Salesforce. What I was told early on, I'm like, I'm in my early 20s, was cap table paints a picture. And anyone who's on that cap table, you need to be able to defend of why they're smart money. So we had 17 investors in total, and every single person on that cap table was a heavy hitter. And because of that, I was trying to raise 300K. And this is at a time when like a 300K seed was like, a decent amount of money. It was just, as soon as people heard who else was involved, Lance Tracy, who sold the company for $650 million cash, people would just be like, take my money. I don't even care what you're doing, and to the point where I had the chairman of one of the major, investment banks in Canada. He came and met with me, and he really wanted to invest. And I was like, we're way oversubscribed. So he was like, what if you close your round today and tomorrow you tell me a number and we'll do it at twice the valuation, and whatever number that is, I'll write a check. So he came in it felt like a movie, when he left the office being like, twice the valuation, any number. So he invested $500,000 the day after we closed the round at twice the valuation. And I think it's because of it's like FOMO and just how like beautiful our cap table was.
I could listen to this for an hour. Yeah, how did that kind of evolve, and then how did Key kind of happen? And I really like how you're working in the people stories around, because if we fast forward to today, like the peer groups and a lot of the people seem so important to you. It feels so much like building community is kind of the common thread I'm hearing through each of these stories. Maybe go to what happened with Key.
So while I was at Airbnb, I like to take on a lot. I've been sort of involved, corner of my desk in Web3 for a long time, bought Bitcoin at 2012, never dove that deep into it, and ended up actually deleting my wallet from the first Bitcoin that I bought to make space for a photo on my iPhone, one of those stories. But anyways, was watching that space for a long time. In 2017 at Airbnb, I saw that hype cycle coming. So I went to one of the co-founders and I said, like, one of the promises of blockchain is to decentralize platforms like Airbnb, where exchanges can happen on a trustless basis. How are we thinking about it? Found out there was no one thinking about it or doing anything about it at Airbnb. So I took over sort of like the project manager, if you will, of putting together a cross-functional team. So originally, that was a big part of what planted the seed. I wouldn't talk too much about it because obviously it became like, depending on the cycle we're in, it's rather like a negative to talk about blockchain, or else it's like, the hottest thing ever. But I started to research fractional ownership of real estate. And it's funny how we're in 2024 now. We're talking 2017. I thought for sure that by 2024, you and I could go long on Manhattan, short on Brooklyn, own a small fraction of a specific hotel if we wanted to, trade that in different ways. That world has not panned out as I expected, and maybe it will, but in like a decade plus from now. Airbnb created a world where you value access over ownership. And the only reason why we value access over ownership is because ownership forfeits our freedom. You graduate college, you buy a couch, and if you buy a place, that mortgage owns you. I was thinking a lot of how do you create a world where you have the benefits of owning with the freedoms and flexibilities of renting? So the benefits of owning being an equity position that can grow in value over time, security of tenure. So you're not, knock on the door 60 days notice and you have to evict because your landlord's son or daughter is going to a nearby university or something like that, right? It happens all the time. And freedoms of renting. So short notice and go, 60 days, you're up and you're out. No buy-sell costs, or a trivial amount at the very least. I ended up looking at my cousin's real estate development and looking at tokenizing it and different models to play with. And then I pitched one of the top VCs in Canada, Plaza Ventures. Founder of Plaza Ventures, Rob Richards, asked some really good questions. It was unlike any conversation I've ever had where he totally understood it and was thinking at a whole nother level. Yeah, into the conversation, he's like, hey, I've been thinking about this for over 5 years and I have $2 billion worth of real estate tied up to do something interesting with. So we got together, and I was traveling a ton, as I mentioned, but whenever I was in Toronto, we would meet on weekends, and we just felt like 1 + 1 = 3. Let's do this together. He took the idea to a whole nother level where it wasn't just fractional investing in real estate and being far more where it's more transactional. I guess a lot more of an ecosystem type play where we would have buildings, one single signature, buy out an entire high-rise condominium development where you can move from New York to Shanghai to Berlin without actually leaving the ecosystem, or move from a 1-bedroom to 2, 3, 4-bedroom without any buy-sell costs, so that it would be completely flexible, and you can build an equity position on your own terms where the more you own, the less rent you pay. So if you start out paying a market rent, let's say $3,000, and you own 10%, you essentially get a 10% discount on market rent. And then there's all these financing tools we can layer on it, like optional leverage, but leverage without a mortgage. A mortgage is all or nothing, right? It's almost like a fractional mortgage that has no break fees if you want to sell at any time. That was key. There's lots of iterations that came afterwards. I know it's super confusing. I feel like 5 years later, I can still struggle to simplify it in a way that's just super easy to understand, but benefits of owning, freedoms of renting, own a home, not a mortgage. That's what we were building.
I want to go back to, I think Taylor hit it on, you seem to be really passionate about building communities, right? From the outdoorsy people to, it seems like even in real estate or investors. And how did you go about going in investments and building that community? What makes you so passionate about it?
Mm-hmm. I started to actively angel invest when I was at Airbnb, and I realized just how competitive angel investing is. I was 25. We discussed, had an exit, was at a big tech company. You'd think that
how old are you now?
I'm 32 now.
32. All right.
So
you just still seem like you're 25. You got this is fair. Yeah. Anyway, keep going.
But yeah, so I thought that it would be easy to just decide what companies I'd want to invest in, and quickly realized that in the Bay Area, the dynamic was flipped around. So as soon as Andreessen Horowitz, Sequoia, one of the big tech funds come in, then all us angels are squeezed out. The rest is history. There is some Airbnb alumni who put together a group called Air Angels, where they leveraged the Airbnb brand and then became more of a signaling effect. Instead of us just being individuals, now we're associated with the growth and data science and design and everything that Airbnb represents. Second investment that they did was in Cerebral, which did 160x on a fully diluted basis. I think everyone, as much as there's a ton of losers in the space, sort of opened up our eyes to this can be real as well. This is also around 2017. I started thinking about affinity networks that would co-invest together. So Airbnb being one of the first. Now there's Uber and name any company like Pinterest. There's an alumni network of employees who are now angel investors who, have had an IPO, have some money. The other one that I thought outside of companies that are interesting is universities. That world has come, Harvard Angel Group. There's a ton. It was almost, to me, when I thought about it, it made me think of watching that TED Talk originally and hearing about Airbnb. I would speak at events and say, by show of hands, how many people here have heard of Airbnb? No one puts up their hand. A year later, a couple people put up their hand. I had a slide that was showing 5 million global guest arrivals that are now in this exponential growth curve. So 5 million, I remember that was my share set pitch to the GSCA. When I joined, it was 400 million. Actually, it was 80 million when I joined. While I was there, I gave a presentation, and in the presentation, they updated the data to 400 million, and now it's in the billions. Of course, it just has continued to grow exponentially. Same thing with Uber, and it's when about Uber, and it's years before the world is at least in Canada, if you're in Silicon Valley, I'm sure everyone knew Uber probably before I did, but yeah. But anyways, I felt that same feeling when I learned about the sharing economy, that same feeling that when I saw where the world was going, feeling there will be a world where the mortgage is disrupted and that you can have the benefits of owning with the freedoms of renting. The same thing is true where angel investing through affinity networks. So I approached the world's largest prop tech conference and pitched them on the idea of let's create a syndicate of attendees and investors where we leverage the brand of this prop tech conference, got permission to build that. I thought the collisions of the world, there would be a ways to participate. And just as a passion project, I put together EO Angels. COVID hit. I feel EO was trying to figure out what to do. First event was with Alfred Lin, who's the past chairman of Zappos, on the board of Airbnb, investor at Sequoia. He said yes really quickly, which then I went to Angela Strange at Andreessen Horowitz, and also A16Z. Andreessen Horowitz is one of the top investors in the world. We had Anne, who's a pioneer, was the third month with Floodgate.
So I was on these. How did you get these people? I remember I'm being on these how did you get these people to come do a Zoom for the EO Angels? I love EO, all respect to EO, but I feel oftentimes a Andreessen, VC probably doesn't have that much respect for EO, or is not where they want to be marketing necessarily. So how did you get these people on?
EO is industry agnostic and geo agnostic. So it definitely doesn't come across as tech centric in any way. It can come across maybe in some respects a bit dated because entrepreneurs aren't just leading into where the world is going. Although I would say there's definitely that cohort within EO without a doubt.
For sure.
We're all EO members. All it takes is one. And in tech, there's a culture of giving back. There's a massive culture of just how can conversations end with how can I help you? And not in a way of if I help you, what do I get in return? It's just a rising tide lifts all boats. So Alfred Lin said yes without even taking a call. It was just an email I sent him. Same with Angela Strange. I didn't even have a relation.
What do you say in these emails? What's the message?
So I mentioned, so at the time I was also, I think how we connected originally was through the under 35 community. I mentioned that I'm starting the angel network within EO for founders that are exited or have some cash that they want to look to invest and learn from the top investors in the world. And then we have this global under 35 community. And I feel the young entrepreneur card always works, So
I love that you keep moving the goalposts. I was also in the under 30. Now I'm the under 35. Now I'm in the under 40.
Yeah, 100%. I know. It was, EO was called YEO, Young Entrepreneurs Organization. And then they dropped the Y when everyone got old, right? And then YPO now has YPO Gold. So if you're over 50, right, you graduate into YPO Gold. So, but yeah, it's all it takes is I feel one person to say yes and then leveraging that. And then when Reid Hoffman said yes, it just now I feel anyone that I reach out to is probably 80% batting average. We had David Sachs, right? What he's done with All In podcast has been incredible. Chip Wilson's actually been a longtime mentor of mine. So that was a bit of an exception. Founder of Lululemon. We go weekly hikes together here in Vancouver.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, he's the man. He's super.
Got to move to Vancouver.
So I know you're like such a great advertisement for
You really
Canada.
are.
So like where do you go next? You've like done these companies, right? You've raised all this money, you've connected all these investors, you created these groups and these networks. I'm wondering like what do you do with it all? It seems like you have a bunch of resources that you could do a lot with.
Yeah.
So what's next?
Yeah, good question, and something that I've been thinking a lot about because I've recently transitioned out of the day-to-day of Key. I love taking on a lot and I just like can't help myself. I love to build, and I want to build in a direction that really puts a dent in the universe, and impact is like one of the main filters, and in using my values as a filter in making decisions. I want to make sure that like at the end of the day, when this journey is done and we look back, that there's no like, oh, what if I did that? Or like, oh, I should have focused my energy on something that maybe was more in line with my values, right? For me, I'm at this moment in time where I can choose to do whatever I want because Key, we raised 8 figures of venture funding. Like I was all in on Key, right? It was like really hard to do anything else outside of that. Now we have, and by the way, I'm also in YPO. Both EO and YPO have really strict non-solicitation policies. So you can't say like, hey, Taylor, do you want to invest in my company? Right. You can be like kicked out for that, right? So everyone in EO and now the YPO group that I've also put together, which I feel like is really ripe for me to eat the world. Everyone has to fill out a survey and they have to opt in to receiving access to deal flow. Global chairman of EO has invested in the last 4 deals in a row that I've launched. The global board got together in person to discuss what we're doing to see if it's offside by any way. And they audited like every email I've ever sent. And they said like, okay, you've done everything by the books. The fact that like you're only receiving an email because you asked to receive deal flow. And it's always invited, never obliged. So you ask what I'm thinking next. There's a lot of interesting use cases when you have a global community of 1,300 founders who are often the founders that are rather exited or have cash flow or are in growth mode because they're looking to raise capital. So I've partnered with Side Door Ventures. They processed 7,000 deals in the last year. Top decile performing VC. I brought Side Door to our community for their digital asset fund, and we invested $8 million USD into their previous fund. And they've just been incredible fiduciaries. Really strong track record. The fund is currently marked at around 100% IRR. So everyone will do quite well off of that. So now we've put together a fund that's very much like for EO and YPO by EO and YPO. So like anyone can submit a deal to an Airtable. There's a bunch of automations in place. You'll get a professional institutional investor's opinion on it. So it's not like you'll be ghosted. They'll say exactly why they like it or don't like it or when it would make sense to lean in. Then I put together a list of 300 VCs that I've met, built some level of relationship with. So companies that aren't a fit for us to invest, maybe because they don't have a lead investor yet or for whatever reason, I just try to be as helpful as possible. Join a number of advisory boards that way for companies that I really believe in. And I'm not just going to make like 2 or 3 intros, but really, really lean in. I've partnered with a group called Supernova. They have 200 exited founders. These are like top-notch founders that have exited. They're trying to think about what's next. And they provide advisory services to founders, and they have a fund to invest in some of their clients. So I feel like Supernova is kind of a perfect example of the type of offering that we can layer onto this community. So what I'd like, full-time, I'm going to be focused on allocating capital, putting up SPVs, investing with Side Door and what we're doing with just community building. And then I'm going to look at, walk before I run, but what are the true like value add, high impact initiatives that we can layer on top of this without becoming like an investment bank, which I'm not passionate about in any way, or like M&A advisor. It's just, that's not what I want to become.
All right, I have, as we kind of wrap here, I have one other question. You've been really at the forefront of a lot of these trends, right? You're very early in the sharing economy, very early, and you talked about crypto. You deleted $2 million worth of crypto off of your hard drive to save space. AI is all the rage right now, but what do you see when not necessarily a prediction, but what do you when you think of the hype cycle in that context? Like, where do you see that we are in 2024 in relation to some of the other trends that you've seen over the last several years?
There's a saying that actually CEO of Mountain Equipment Co-op, so Canadian REI, the guy told me once, which is the world has never moved this fast before, and it will never move this slow again. Right. So the pace of innovation, the pace of change is accelerating every day. Is that ever true? It's like so crazy to think about our lifetime, how much the world has changed. It's just our lifetime. I had a great aunt who I was at her 100th birthday party. She was born before there was the automobile or airplane. It's like wild to think about how much the world has changed in her lifetime. AI isn't going anywhere. We're still in a massive hype cycle. I hosted an event close to a year ago where we thought maybe this hype cycle was starting to like slow down a little bit. The top investor was saying it hasn't. 1 year later, we invested in OpenAI. We had 20 million of interest in 2 days just from our community. That doesn't include one family who wanted to put in 40, someone who wanted to put in 75 million, another family that wanted 100 million. And this is at like a crazy valuation that's super hard to justify, but people are betting that this is essentially the next Google, right? There's like no other way you could justify the valuation without really believing that this is the next internet almost. When I think about AI, I have a bit of a contrarian view on that a lot of innovation is going to come from the large tech companies that already exist. I see so much deal flow of people that are starting AI sales enablement, AI, like whatever it might be. And whenever I see, like I had one yesterday as AI sales enablement, I always take the filter of, okay, what is Salesforce doing? What's HubSpot doing? And when you look at all the data right now, there is more capital being invested by big tech than there is in the venture capital of the world. And a lot of big tech has figured out innovation. Angela Strange on our second fireside chat that we hosted mentioned the battle between incumbents. And, you look at like the innovators, the new entrants versus the establishment and who wins. And she said that the battle between new entrants and the establishment comes down to if new entrants can get distribution before the establishment gets gets innovation, before they wake up to innovation, right? So the best example of this is probably robo-advisors, right? Like the wealth fronts of the world. And it was pretty quick for Charles Schwab to turn on distribution overnight. And I think a lot of the venture world discounted the power of distribution when a business model, it's not like you have IP in a business model. All big tech has woken up to the power of AI. So like distribution is happening, and it's happening at an incredible, incredible pace. There will be a ton of winners, like, the fact that Zoom beat Teams and beat Microsoft and Google. Zoom is like the main platform for us to take video calls. I'm sure there'll be some massive winners that come out that are startups. But I typically, if I look at a company that Google can just squash in a heartbeat by deciding to turn on a switch and do something similar, and the market's big enough that for them to justify it, then I typically am a quick pass.
All right. Well, as we wrap, we have one next question, which is also one that we go around and do. And that's like, what's one life hack that you maybe recently discovered or that you use on a regular basis? And I'll go first again, so you guys have a little time to think about it. I think this is on brand with your AI talk. I've been using this app called Perplexity. You guys heard about this? Perplexity it's basically a better ChatGPT in terms of your average questions. Like if you're looking for flights or restaurants tonight, it kind of pulls data from, say, TripAdvisor and Yelp and ratings a little better than more comprehensive than ChatGPT does. So it's it's my new search engine.
That's a good one. I have one. My wife actually gave it to me. She goes, "Hey, when y'all do the life hacks, don't forget, this is a fun one. We all hate fees for concerts, comedy events, all those things. You can skip the fees by going to the box office. And the extra hack is that some box offices, like here in New York, you can go to Madison Square Garden, and MSG services a lot of the theaters in Manhattan. So you can actually go to MSG, or you can go to the Beacon Theater on the Upper West Side to get tickets with no fees at Madison Square Garden and vice versa. So you don't have to wait in the lines. You just walk to Beacon Theater, pay no fees. But the other big advantage is that sometimes they have access to tickets that you don't get online. They're not on Ticketmaster. So you get really good seats at the best price possible, no fees, and you just walk out with your tickets. I've done it myself too.
What do you mean like fees? Like you're saying there's still a price for the ticket, but online they charge you a fee.
Yeah, they charge you all those nonsense fees. All the Ticketmaster fees are zero when you go to the actual box office, which can really add up because they're like per ticket. So if you're buying 2 or 4 or 6 tickets, it's big savings and you get better seats.
Yeah, that's awesome that it's like your hack is not technology related. It's like anti-technology. It's like go to
yeah, exactly. It's real life. It's walking.
Cool. I think for me, I really love Atomic Habits. If you know the book, and the theme is just 1% better. So every year I pick a theme. That's my theme for this year is just 1% better. So like all the little hacks add up a lot. I'm really getting a lot of value out of breath work. We invest in a company called Othership. That actually be happy to make an intro if you'd be interested in having Robbie on the show. He was at Ethereum when it was sub $10. He has a story where he struggled with addiction and then got into cold therapy. Built out an illegal hot cold therapy venue in his garage, and then eventually started Othership and a breathwork app. It's super cool. But I get a lot of value. They're opening up in New York. So if you guys or any of your listeners want some free passes, I'm sure we can hook that up. And yeah, so that will be my hack. There's lots of little ones, but Othership is really cool.
Thanks, man. We'll definitely take an intro to that. I love the website. I'm just looking at it now, othership.us. But I see how addiction, crypto, by the way, is an addiction, I feel like, in and of itself. So I can see how that can have led him to starting Othership. Well, so last thing, anything you want the audience to know? How can people get a hold of you? Anything you want to pitch?
Yeah, no, nothing to pitch. Feel free to share my email with anyone who wants to reach out. Happy to support in any way I can. And yeah, happy to be of value. I always love coming back to the ecosystem. So anytime I've done podcasts, I often give permission for you guys to share. Maybe we'll just share my key email, Daniel@lifeatkey.com. If I can be of value, I'll lean in and help where I can.
Thanks so much for coming. You were great.
Thanks, Daniel.
All right. Thanks, you guys.
Have a great day.
The water's fine, homie, jump into the deep end. Sow it, you will reap it. We talking how to start it, how to grow it, how to keep it. Take a deep breath. You are now rocking with Founder Secrets.